Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so last class we did some example writing functions. So we will continue with function today. So we know to write a function, we need a title line and a block, right? And in title line, we have three things, right? We need to specify the result type, the function name, and then we need to specify the parameter, like what input we want here. And after the title line, we will have a block for each function, which will perform your C++ code, right? It will do the task for you. And to call the function, right? To use a function, you will just call by call its name, right? Have the function name, and then you will just pass in whatever the argument you need for the input. Okay, and now let's write a function called max3, which will calculate the maximum of 3 input. So let me give you the main function first. So let's say in your main program, you will ask the user for 3 input. So let's say you declare 3 variables called A, B, and C. And then you will ask the user to enter 3 integers. And then we will take in the value. And then we will print out your maximum input is, and then you will print out the maximum value. So you will call the max3 function, and you will pass in A, B, and C, or your 3 input. And then you will end the line. So this is your main program. So how do we write the max3 function? So we know to write a function, we need to start with the title line. So what would the title line of this function look like?
It's returning an int.
Okay, so we will have a result type of int. And then we will follow by the function name, which is called the max3. And then in the parentheses, we will take in on 3 input. Now to just to make the parameter and argument different, I will call it int x, int y, int z. So when we talk about x, y, z, we're referring to the parameter in the function, and then we talk about a, b, c as the input. Right? You could use a, b, c. There's nothing wrong to use a, b, and c. That's to distinguish the two. I will call it x, y, z. Okay, now we want to find the maximum value. Okay, so let's say we compare two at a time. Right, so I see people have, if your A is greater than B and A is greater than C, then you return A. Right, then there are a lot of cases there. Right, so there are a lot of scenario there. So just to
Find the max of two of them first.
yeah, so we can find the maximum of two, and so we'll compare two at a time. So let's say we will compare X and Y, right? So here we have three variable, right? And let's say I want to make the first variable the maximum, which if Y is greater than X, right? So if your Y is greater than X, I will change the X to the Y value. Okay, so now your X will be the maximum or the largest number between X and Y. And then you will compare X with Z. Now, if your Z is greater than X, then your X will equal to Z. You will change the X value to Z value, which means you will compare X with the next two variable. Okay, if the variable is greater than X, then you replace the X with the larger number. So after you doing that, after you comparing the two number, then your X must be the largest number. Then you will return X. Any questions here?
Why do we do return X?
Because we need to return the maximum of the three number. Right? So we need to return an integer. I see people asking, so this return X where you call the function. So yeah, so you will return this value to where we call the function. So if you look at here, we call this function in the main function. Right here we have the max A, B, and C. So what it does is when you call the function, it will take you to the function, and then you will run the code and then return the result here. Right, so last class we did few example on how to write a function, right? You write your own function. Now this class we will take a closer look at how exactly a function run. Okay, and I didn't mention in the previous class is like when we call the function here, we actually call the function by its value. Right, so the C++ here, it will perform something called the call by value when we call the function. So what it does, if you look at it here, right? So whenever you call the function, right, it will stop work on the current task. So if you look at it, we will run the function and we see it's calling the function. Right, so since it's calling the function, we will stop working out here and then switch to the function. Okay, so in our function, where we will create variable for each parameter. Right, so for each parameter here, right, we will create a variable.
So
and
you
then
replace, sorry, you replace the function call with the return statement?
Yeah, so that's at the end when you finished running the function.
Okay.
Right, so you can think of it as here. Right, in the main function, you have three variables. Right, you have variable A, you have variable B, and then you have variable C. right? And these three are integer. You have 3 integer variable, and then you will ask the user to give you this 3 value. So let's say the user give you a 5, a 7, and a 2. Okay, and then you want to calculate. Okay, so after you taking the input to A, B, and C, right? So you will see out your maximum input is, and then you will call the function, right? Because you want to calculate the maximum between these 3 numbers. So you will stop working here, and then you will jump to the function. Now in your function, right, you need to create variable for each parameter, right? So you will create X, Y, and Z. Okay, now to calculate the argument here, you will make a photocopy of those values as initial value for the parameter. So what you do here is you will make photocopies. So you will copy A, right? So A is in the X position, so you will copy the value in A to X. You will copy over the values of 5, 7, and 2. Okay, and then it will perform the block of code of the function. So it will run the function here until we hit the return. So if we run the function, we will check is y greater than x. Now in here, y is greater than the x, so we will set y we will change the x to y. Right, we'll set x to y. So x now will become 7. And then we will move on. We will check is z greater than x. Now z here is 2. So 2 is not greater than 7. So we just move on. And then we will return x. Now where does the x return to? So it will perform the block of function until it reach a return. Then we will return it to, so we will return to work on P where we stopped before. Right, so wherever the task we stopped before, now we will go back to it, and we will replace the function by the return answer. So wherever the function here, now we return it, we return the value to it. So instead of you have the function here, right, you will replace it with the return answer, which is x, and in this case, you will return a 7. So when you run that, right, it will ask you to enter 3 integers, and let's say we give 5, 7, and 2, and then it will print out your max input is, and then it will print a 7, and then it will end the line. Any questions here? Okay, and I see people asking, can we use the same variable name in the main? So if you want to name the x, y, z as a, b, c, it's fine. There's nothing wrong if you name it as a, b, and c. I just want to distinguish the variable you pass in, and then the variable for the parameter. So if you name as A, B, C, it's fine. Then you will just make a copy of A, B, and C. So you will have like the variable with the same name in the main function, also in your function. Right, so just to avoid confusion, so I just make different names so you can, you know what's the variable from the input from the main function and what's the variable for the function. Now, let me show you the code here. So I will put the code in. So we have the max3 function exactly as what we have here, and we have the main function, right, exactly as what we have here. So we will compile it. And I'll just run it here, right? Since it's the same as what we have here. So I don't show the code here. Okay, and let's enter 3 integer, 5, 7, and 2. Right, so it will say your maximum input is 7 is the maximum input. Right, so let's run it a few times, just give different inputs. So let's have the integer 1, 2, and 3, and then say your maximum input is 3. So we know this works. Any questions here? Now to see. Okay, so to answer the question earlier, can we use the same variable? Right, if you use the same variable, let me make a copy. Okay, so let's make it the same variable. So let me change it to A, B, and C. And then here we will return A. Right, then we will get the same thing. Right, so there's no difference between the two. Right, so it will ask you to enter 3 integers. So let's do it 5, 7, and 2. Right, so it will store it as A, B, and C, and then you will pass in this 3 value to the function. And then it will print you the number 7. So it works the same, right? So it doesn't matter how you name it. Right, so however variable or however name you want to name your variable, then that's the variable you will use when you write your block of code. Okay, and notice that if you notice that in the function, we changed the value, right? We changed the value for x. Does the value here affect the variable we have in the main function?
No.
No, right? So I see people, I hear people say no. So if you look at the variable we are working on here is a photocopy. So even you name it the same, you will have a photocopy of A, B, and C. So no matter what you change here, it will stays in your function. It does not change the variable outside of your function. Do we see that? So let's print the value out. Okay, so here will be the initial value. Right, so let's unseat out.
Shouldn't it be less than less than?
Where will be less than less than?
After the C out. On the same line that you're writing.
On the same line, you have your two arrows going the
Yeah.
different way.
Yes. So let's say we want to print out the initial value of A. B. And C. Okay, then let's print it again. So here will be the final value for your A, B, and C, right? So the A, B, and C at the end. So we'll print it once before we run the program, right? Run the function, then we will print it once after we print the function. And we will also print this inside, like, so we'll also print it before we run the function. So if you look at it here, so we will print it, we will call it before function. And we will print it again this is after we run the function. Okay, so if we run that, we have, so let's put in 5, 7, and 2. So we have, so once we enter the value, we know the initial A, B, and C are 5, 7, and 2. Then after, okay, and then here you have, okay, so what happened here is since we have another message before we run the max function, so what it actually does is it will, so after we print the initial A, B, and C, it will print your maximum input is And then we will have before the function. So before we run the function, we have the ABC to be 5, 7, and 2. Now after, right, so before we return the value, so we're still inside of the function, we will get 7, 7, 2. So that's before we leave the function, we have ABC to be 7, 7, 2 since we changed the value. Now we will print, since we will return the X, we will return the A, which is maximum value. So it will return the 7. But when we print the variable, if we return the value for A, B, and C, we still get 5, 7, and 2, right? Which we don't change the value here. Any questions here? So if you look at it, so when C++ perform the call by value, right? So we explain about this part. So we will make a copy of those value and then do calculation or doing your task based on those value, right, of your parameter, and then you will return the result. And all the changes you made in the function are temporary, which means it will not be seen anywhere outside of the function. So all the change will only affect inside of the function, not outside of the function. Okay, I see people asking earlier, can we use void for your function? Now that will depend on what you want to do for the function. If you want to write a function that will return you the maximum value, so you can use it as calculation. You just want to use it, so you can use it, you just use it as an integer. So you can add number to the function, you can search a number, you just treat it as integer. But if you write your function as the void type, that means normally you will print the result in your function instead of return it. So you could write a function where you have the void type. Then you will print that inside of the function, then you will just return it. Then you won't see out the function since you use it as a void. It returns nothing. So it depends on what you want to do with the function. So if you look at here, we want to see out the function, which we want to print out the maximum value. So you should declare as the integer type. Does that make sense? Okay, then we will move on. So since we talk about the call by value when we call a function, then there must be some other option. So besides the call by value, C++ can also perform something called call by reference. So the difference will be in call by reference, your function doesn't work with photocopies. So if you remember here, right, when we work with the call by value, when we run the function, it will make a copy of our data, and then you are working on the copy. So whatever change you made here is temporary. It won't affect the original data. Where if you do call by reference, then the function doesn't work with the photocopies. It will actually work with the original data. It work with actual data, which means whatever change you made to it, it's permanent. So if you make change inside of the function, it will change the variable outside of the function as well. Right. So that's why we call it call by reference. So the variable you pass in is just a reference. It's like you point it to this position. So whatever change you made to it, you make change to the actual data. Okay, so that's a difference. Now, how do we do it? So C++ allow us to treat a function parameter by call by reference. You can mark this in the title line by putting an ampersand between the data type and the name of the parameter. So if you look at the example here, right? So when we specify the parameter, right, we will have the data type and then the variable. Right, so if you just write your title line like this, it's called by value, which means you make a copy of it. If you want to change it to call by reference, then you can add an ampersand between the data type and then the variable name. So if you add an ampersand, you will change it to call by reference. So if you add this symbol to it, whatever change you make here will affect the value outside of the function. So let me just quickly show you. So let's say I add an ampersand here. Okay, you just add that in between the value and then the x. It doesn't matter you have a space in between them or not. Okay, so to make it nice, I normally just put it in before the name. You just put it in between the data type and then the name. Now, if you look at it, so we will expect it to print out the A value. So if you look at it, I will see out A before we run the function. And I will print out A after we run the function. Okay. Now let's say we just do example 5, 7, and 2. So if you look at that before we run the function, the A, right? We just print out the first value. So our A is 5. After we run the function, the A becomes 7. So by adding an ampersand, it changed whatever change you make in the function actually affect the value outside. Okay, and I see people asking, do we place the ampersand only once? Well, it depends on which parameter you want to call by reference. So if you want the parameter called by value, you don't put ampersand. If you want the parameter called by reference, then you put ampersand. So it's not like you put one ampersand, one the variable, and then it affect all the input. No, so you need to, so you can determine on each variable. So for the parameter that did not put an ampersand in front of it is still called by value. So the difference is if you put ampersand, this x is actually referring to A, which you can think of. You have here you have A, B, C, and then to call the function you have x, y, and z. Well, you you have an n% for x. So this x is actually pointed to the A. And then this y, you make a photocopy, and then z, you make a photocopy. So if I go to the function again, right? So let's say I just want to change the the y value. So let's say I make y to be y plus z. So I just want to make some changes here. Okay, so here will be, I will see out y in f. And then we will print out y and line. Now here, besides printing out the A, we will also print out B. Okay. So this y in the function is also referring to B in the original function. Okay, so let's save this. And let's run it. And then we have 5, 7, and 2. And we run that. So we have 5. And then we have, so before we run the function, we have A to be 5. And then we print out. Okay, so since here I have your maximal input is, so it kind of messed up the format, but you can ignore this. And then in the function, you have y in the function is equal to 9, right? Since we let y to be y plus c, so we have 7 plus 2, which is 9. But if you look at here, this is the maximum value it print out, and then here we have 7, 7. The first 7 is the A, which we changed the value since we changed the X here, which it will referring back to the A. Now the Y here, in the function, we change it to 9. But outside of the function, this B here, you did not change it, so it's still 7. Is that clear? Okay. So here's the difference. So let me erase that. So it depends on which value you want to change. You can put an ampersand between them. Okay, now let's look at the next example. So let's say you want to make a swap function. Okay, so what it does is, right, so let's say I have 2 score here. So let's say my score is 0 and then your score is 10. And then I say, you know what? Your score is higher than me, so I want to swap my score with your score. So I will call a swap function. And then what I did here is, then when I print my score, I will expect my score to be 10 since I swap with your score. Then your score will be 0 since your score becomes my score since we swapped it. So how do we write this function? What's the title line? Yes?
Use references.
Yeah, so we need to use call by reference for the parameter. Okay, so what's the title line for this function? What's the return type? Void, right? Because we don't need to return anything. Right, you have this function by itself. Right, so what this function does is swap the value, but you don't need to return anything. You don't need to have anything as a replace of this function. So you will have void. And then our function name is called swap. And then you will pass in your input. Now, what's your parameter? How do we define our parameter? We know there are two inputs.
Int ampersand
You have int x, sure,
and int ampersand y.
and then int ampersand y. Right, so here you want to pass in two input, and they are both integer type, right? My school and your school, they are both int. So we have int type for both input, and then you just name it some variable. So we just call it x and y. Now, since we want to swap the actual value from the main function, then we need to use an ampersand, where you want to change the both value. So you put ampersand on both value. Then we need to make the swap function. How do we make the swap function? Can I just let x equals to y, and then let y equals to x?
No.
What's the problem here? They will become the same number, right? So once you have x equals to y, you change the x value already. Then y will become y, so y did not change. So how do we fix that?
Use a temporary variable.
Okay, so okay, I see people say int ampersand x. So the ampersand is not a variable name, right? Ampersand is just a symbol to notice that you are calling this parameter by reference. But you still referring to the variable as x and y, right? So your x and y are your variable name. So we need to have, so you pretty much need to like create a new variable and just temporarily store the data, right? So we can have int, and then CPO say like create a temporary number, and let's say we store the x value, right? Then we was, since we already stored the x value, then we will let x equals to y. And then y cannot equal to x since we already changed x already, but we store it in the temporary, right? So I see people say store the x in a helper variable. So the y, we will set it equals to 10. Right, so what it does is if you have two variables, right, x and y, and then let's say you pass in, you have 0 and then the 10. If you don't store it, if you just set x equals to y, then you will have 10 here, and then you say y equals to x, it's still 10. So you need to, so before you change the x, you need to store the 0 somewhere. You need to store the value you have in x somewhere. So we create a new variable called temp, and then we will store 0 into the temp function. Then you can change the x to y, and then your y, which is 10 here. And then for your y value, you cannot set it equal to x since you already change it. Then you will set y to the temp function, which stores your original x. Okay, now let's look at the example here. We already have the main function. So we just need to have the swap function. Then we have int ampersand x and ampersand y. And then we will create a temp value. So we will store x somewhere, and then we will change x to y. We will swap the two value, and then let y equals to the temp value, right? Our helper function. And then we can just return. It's void, so we don't need to return anything. Just hit return, and then that's it. Okay, so let's save it.
Aren't you returning an int there?
Yes, it's supposed to be void. Yeah, we have void here. Okay, so
is the return statement necessary when you have void?
no, not in this case.
Okay, so on the test, can I not write return if I have void?
You should have it.
I should have the return?
Yes. Even your program should will still run without it, but you should still have it. So whenever you write a function, just remember to have the return. Right, the reason is when you write like a bigger function, like sometimes you want to return the function in the middle of your code, maybe inside like a if statement or in a loop. It just in this function, you return when you finish running all the code. So even when you don't have it, it will go back. But once you finish here, it will go back, and since you return nothing, but you should still have it as like a signal of okay, your function will end here. It will stop here. Let me see. Okay, so here is our function, pretty much same as we have here. So if you run that, you will see I have my score to be 10 and your score to be 0. Any questions here? And now let's say I did not put n% on y. How would that change the code? Right? How would that change the outcome?
Your score would still be 10.
So you will have my score is 10 and your score is also 10. So if you look at it here, but if I don't put n% on y, that means it will only changing the first value. So whatever value it passed in first, if you change the x, it will affect the value outside of the function. So it will affect the my score, but whatever value you pass in for your score, it won't change. Right, so here we change y to my score. Right, so y is changed to 0. But since we did not put n% on y, the change will stay in the function, not outside of the function. Do we see that? Okay, so I see people asking, so when we use call by reference, you want to make the permanent change to the data, yes. Which means wherever your function, wherever change you made inside the function, it will affect the data outside the function. You are changing the actual data. Where if you just call the function by value, you are working on the photocopy, or you are making a copy of your data. So wherever the change, it will stay in the function. It won't change the actual data. So in general, you try to avoid writing function call by reference, unless you really need to use it, like the swap function, right? Because the goal for swap function is to switch the data. But in practical, you're trying to avoid it as much as possible, because if you call if you write function call by reference, wherever mistake you make in the function, it will affect the actual data. Then you can undo it. Where if you call by value, let's say later you figure out, okay, there's something wrong with your function, you can still go to the function and then unchange it. Okay, then we will end the class here.
Thank
And
you,
we will-
Professor.
And we will
Thank you.
continue next class. Have a
Have a
nice
nice
weekend.
weekend.